Putney Debates. The programme is introduced by the historian Christopher Hill.
In the whole of previous history, there hadn't been anything quite like the Putney Debates. It was on the 28th October, 1647, that parliamentary generals, junior officers and privates marched to Putney Church. There they sat on equal terms, deciding what the future of England was to be. In their camps and billets in and around London, the troops waited for the outcome. Would agreement be reached to reunite the army, or would its disunity undo all the achievements of 4 years' civil war? The new model army, which had won the war for Parliament, was a unique army in more than one respect. First, it was composed largely of volunteers, free men, very different from the conscripted down-and-outs who formed the rank and file in other 17th century armies. Secondly, whereas normally it was the social function of the aristocracy to act as military commanders, in the new model army there was not one lord. Thanks largely to Oliver Cromwell, the new model was based on the principle of the career open to the talents. Thirdly, it was based, again thanks largely to Cromwell, on religious toleration, a feeble phrase which historians use to describe what had happened after 1640 when traditional controls broke down. It meant, in effect, liberty of the press, of association and discussion for the lower classes, free from supervision by their social superiors. Though the war was over, some troops were still needed to reconquer Ireland, which in 1641 had taken advantage of the crisis in England to revolt against foreign rule. While all this was being laboriously debated in Parliament, the army sat around waiting to be disbanded. As in 1918 and 1945, the situation generated radical talk. In February 1647, the troops were told that those who didn't volunteer for service in Ireland would be disbanded, with no mention of their very considerable arrears of pay. Radical talk was at once translated into action. Petitions were organized, starting from the rank and file. Agitators were elected. The word agitators simply means representatives or delegates of the soldiers. It hasn't yet got the sinister overtones it acquired later. In order to maintain unity in the army, the officers had to associate themselves with the men's grievances, but the agitators made the running. In June 1647, 500 horse, under the command of Cornet Joyce, acting in the name of the agitators, snatched the king from the control of Parliament and marched him off to the army. Cromwell was probably warned in advance that this was going to happen, but it's very unlikely that it was his idea. Once it had happened, however, the political situation was transformed. At a general rendezvous 2 days later, the High Command agreed to the setting up of an army council in which elected representatives of the rank and file sat side by side with their commanders. Such an institution had no historical precedent and wasn't to be repeated until 1917 in Russia. When in July 1647 the army occupied London and forced some of the more conservative leaders to withdraw from Parliament, the Army Council found itself discussing the future constitution of England. The generals, Cromwell and Ireton, negotiated desperately with the captive king, trying to persuade him to accept a relatively conservative settlement under their control. The London Levellers produced their constitution, the Agreement of the People, selling at twopence a copy, which would have abolished monarchy and House of Lords and handed sovereign power over to a parliament to be elected on a much more democratic franchise. The agitators and some officers associated themselves with the Agreement of the People, and this was the subject of discussion at the meeting in Putney Church. Thanks to an extraordinary stroke of luck, we have a verbatim account of these debates, in which fundamental questions of representation and democracy are discussed in confrontation between generals and radicals. Never before, so far as we know, had ordinary people debated matters of national politics on equal terms with their betters. And thanks to the stenographer, it is one of the very few occasions before the 19th century on which we hear ordinary people speaking for themselves. Usually we hear what their betters thought they were thinking, or ought to be thinking. 3 words used in the debates may be confusing. The agreement means the agreement of the people, the leveler Republican Constitution accepted by the agitators. It is contrasted with the heads of proposals, or simply the proposals, a limited monarchical constitution which the generals were trying to persuade the king to accept. A more difficult word, which plays a big part in the debates, is engagements. The modern equivalent, I think, would be commitments. The agitators didn't believe that they, or the rank and file in general, were bound by any commitment entered into before the Representative Army Council was set up on the 5th of June 1647. But for the generals and most of the officers, history began before June 47. Between 42 and 46, they had accepted commissions from Parliament, had raised troops, and had killed men in Civil War battles. Parliament's declared aim was to deliver the king from the evil councillors by whom he was allegedly surrounded. So the officers quite genuinely felt that they had entered into engagements which they couldn't light-heartedly discard. The men felt no less strongly that no one had asked their opinions at any stage of the war which they had fought, and that they were not bound by oaths which others had sworn. Of the characters in the debates, Oliver Cromwell was the popular war-winning general, whose readiness to cooperate with the radicals had won him their confidence. In the debates, he tries to appear as a neutral chairman, leaving the hatchet work to Commissary General Ayrton, a Nottinghamshire gentleman with legal training who had recently married Cromwell's daughter and certainly enjoyed his confidence. Colonel Rainborough, son of a sea captain, is the highest-ranking officer to side with the agitators. He is bluff, testy, well aware that the High Command would like to get rid of him. They pushed him off into the Navy. Edward Sexby, a cavalry trooper, and so probably a yeoman owning his own horse, is the leading agitator, a shrewd man of democratic principles, but no match in debate for the better-educated Ayrton. John Wildman, the civilian London leveller invited by the agitators to speak for them, is much more sophisticated. He's a young man in his 20s, but he too has had legal training and can stand up to Ayrton. Gough, a salter in private life, has to a high degree the millenarian religious conviction which animates so many of these men. Most of them, like their contemporary and political ally John Milton, thought of Jesus Christ as shortly expected king who would, in Milton's words, put an end to all earthly tyrannies. This is the background to the debates we're about to hear.
Putney Church, Thursday, October the 28th, 1647. The first day of the meeting of the General Council of the Army. Commissary General Ayrton begins the debate.
Declared open this meeting of the General Council of the Army. This meeting is for public business. Those having anything to say have liberty to speak.
Sexby, Lieutenant General Cromwell and Commissary General Ayrton. Your reputations have been much blasted. We seek to satisfy all men, but we have dissatisfied all men. We labour to please a king, and except we cut our throats, we shall not please him. We have gone about to support a house which will prove rotten-beamed. I mean the present Parliament, which consists of rotten members. You are convinced God will have you act on, but consider how you shall act and take those ways that will secure you and the whole kingdom.
Mr. Sexby, you were speaking to us too, I know not why, except you think Commissary General Ayrton and I have done somewhat different from the resolution of this General Council of the Army. What I acted in Parliament in the name of the Council of the Army, I had my warrant for it from you here. What I spoke in another capacity, as a member of Parliament, was free for me to do, that there should be a second address to the King. I deliver that as my own sense, and what I delivered as my own sense I am not ashamed of.
I declare I do not seek, nor will join with them that do seek the destruction of Parliament or King. Neither will I consent with those who will not attempt all the ways that are possible to preserve both.
Let the agitators proceed.
Everard, may it please your honour, here are 2 soldiers and 2 of our friends sent from the agitators to present this agreement of the people to your considerations and desire your advice. We desire that all carping upon words might be laid aside. We have here met for the right understanding of one another. You are resolved, everyone, to purchase our inheritances which have been lost, and free this nation from the tyranny that lies upon us. And for that purpose we present this agreement for your consideration. An agreement of the people of England for a firm and present peace upon grounds of common right and freedom. Since our former oppressions and not yet ended troubles have been occasioned by the unequalled constitution of Parliament, we are fully resolved that hereafter Parliament be no longer unequally constituted. In order whereunto we declare, first, the redistribution of parliamentary seats according to the number of inhabitants. Second, the dissolution of the present Parliament. Third, that the people do, of course, choose themselves a Parliament once every 2 years.
These gentlemen are members of this army, engaged with this army. But by this agreement they seem to be of a fixed resolution. They hold together as a formed party and set down resolutions to which they expect the compliance of others.
Fourth, that the power of this and all future parliaments is inferior only to those who choose them and extends without consent of any other person.
This agreement of the people contains very great alterations in the constitution of this kingdom. Alterations in the form of government that it hath been under, I believe, I may almost say, since it was a nation. What the consequences of such an alteration as this would be, if there were nothing else to be considered, wise and godly men ought to consider. I say, if there were nothing else contained in your agreement. The expressions in it are very plausible, and if we could leap out of one condition into another, I suppose there would not be much to dispute. But how do we know if, whilst we are disputing these things, another company of men shall not gather together and put out a paper as plausible perhaps as this, and not only another and another, but many of this kind? And if so, what do you think the consequence of that would be? Would it not be confusion? And if so, what would that produce but an absolute desolation to the nation? And we, in the meantime, tell the nation 'tis for your liberty, 'tis for your good. There are very great mountains in the way of this agreement. But I am confident, if your hearts be upright as ours are, and God will judge between you and us, that you bring this agreement to have anything taken from it that may by clear reason be inconvenient or unhonest. But first, there is the question of how far we are already engaged. You that are not soldiers, you reckon yourselves at a loose, as men who have no obligations upon you. Perhaps we conceive we have. In the time of our danger, we issued declarations. We have been required by Parliament to declare what we meant. Having done that, how far we are still engaged, or not, is first to be considered.
Well, being yesterday at a meeting with the agitators of the 5 regiments, they desired me to be their mouth. I conceive the chief weight of your honour's speech was that you were first to consider how far you were already engaged, before you could consider what was just in this agreement.
Sure.
But by this agreement, it shall appear whether your engagements be just or no. If they were not just, I am confident of the searings of your consciences. But of all past engagements, the agitators see none which are just.
Surely this gentleman...
Mr. Wildman, Your Honour.
Mr. Wildman hath not been acquainted with our engagements. If we are free to break any engagement that subsequently appears on just that principle, will take away all commonwealths, and men of that principle will think themselves as little obliged to honor the authority you propose in your agreement. I confess, there are things really good in it. There are those things I should rejoice to see obtained. And if we were, as you urge, free from the engagements that lie upon us, I should concur with this agreement further than as the case doth stand, I can. Therefore, I wish we consider our former engagements, which are engagements of the whole army. And we must not recede from them until we are convinced they are unjust. And when we are convinced, I cannot concur with Mr. Wildman's principle that we are absolved from them. I move some be especially appointed to go over our engagements, and I shall be very glad to be none of them.
Rainborough, this agreement of the people I saw by chance, and had no resolution to have been at this council but to do my duty. But I met with a letter to let me know that my regiment should be immediately disposed from me on my being made Vice-Admiral. I am loath to leave the army with whom I will live and die. Rather than lose my regiment, Parliament can exclude me or imprison me. For truly, while I am employed abroad, I will not be undone at home. I shall speak my mind of this agreement. Whoever hath done this, hath done it with much respect for the good of his country. It is said there are plausible things in it. Again, it is also said, if a man be engaged, he must perform his engagements. I am wholly confident that every honest man is bound in duty to God and his conscience, let him be engaged in what he will, to decline it when he sees it to be evil. A further objection is made against this agreement. Difficulties. Oh, unhappy men are we that ever begun this war. If ever we had looked upon difficulties, I do not know we should ever have looked an enemy in the face. Truly, I think the Parliament were very indiscreet to contest with the King if they did not consider first that they should go through difficulties. No man entered this war that did not engage to go through difficulties. Lieutenant General Cromwell says this agreement is a huge alteration, a bringing in of new laws. If writings be true, there have been many scufflings between the honest men of England and those that tyrannized over them, and there is none of those just and equitable laws you claim the people of England are born to, but are encroachments on the once enjoyed privileges of their rulers.
Truly, I am very glad that Colonel Rainborough is here, because it argues that we shall enjoy his company longer than I thought we should have done.
If I am not kicked out...
Truly, I do not know what the meaning of that expression is, nor what the meaning of any hateful word is here. We are almost all soldiers here. All considerations of not fearing difficulties do wonderfully please us. All words of courage animate us to carry on our business, to do God's business. Concerning engagements and breaking them, it was offered by nobody that though an engagement were never so unrighteous, it ought to be kept. But perhaps we are upon engagements that we cannot with honesty break. That is all I have said. Therefore, why need anybody be angry or offended? Our engagements are to the kingdom, and to everyone in the kingdom that could look upon what we did publicly declare. They are to Parliament. And this is what I offer, because the kingdom is in the danger it is, and time may be ill spent in debates rather than I would have this kingdom break in pieces before some company of men be united together to a settlement, I will withdraw myself from the army tomorrow and lay down my commission.
William Gough, I shall but humbly take the boldness to put this motion, that there might be a seeking of God in the things that now lie before us. It hath been our trouble night and day that God hath not been with us as formerly. If we have not the will of God in these councils, God may be found among some other councils. God does seem evidently to be throwing down the glory of all flesh. The greatest powers in the kingdom have been shaken. God hath thrown down the glory of the king. He hath thrown down the city. I do not say that God will throw us down. I hope better things. But he will have the glory. It may be we think we are the only instruments that God hath in his hands. I move that we may not act till we have thoroughly weighed this matter and considered our own ways too, by setting ourselves to seek the Lord.
I think we do it first thing tomorrow. I shall lay aside all, either to convince or be convinced as God shall please.
By agreement of this council, tomorrow in the morning, we do set apart for every man to give himself up in private if he so chooses. Each one as God shall incline their hearts, some in one place, some in another.
We should not meet as two contrary parties, but together.
I have discharged the agitators' trust in me. I cannot engage for the others, but I shall engage my deepest interest to get them to return.
I hope we know God better than to make appearances of religious meetings covers for insinuation among you. The design is to seek the guidance of God, but it seems as much in this as in anything we are not all of a mind. I'd rather we should devolve our strength to you than that the kingdom, by this army's division, should suffer loss. For that's in all our hearts, to profess above anything that's worldly the public good of the people. And if that be in our hearts, perhaps God may unite us and carry us both one way.
I desire to return to the business in hand. The agitators desire nothing but the union of the army, but they apprehend 2 or 3 days may lose the kingdom. Now, I desire in the sight of God to speak, I mean plainly. There may be an agreement between king and parliament, because none of the people's grievances are redressed. The agitators apprehend that 2 or 3 days may lose the kingdom. Now, the intent of this agreement is to secure those rights of the people in their parliaments which were declared by this army on the 14th of June to be absolutely insisted upon. Now, is this agreement just? And is it the people's due? If it is, there can be no other binding engagement.
Truly, sir, I was so taken off from all other thoughts by what Lieutenant Colonel Gough moved that I did not think to speak any more. But what Mr. Wildman hath said renews the occasion. If what he hath delivered be truth and innocence, nay, if I did not think it hath venom and poison in it,
sir,
I would not speak. There is no other foundation of right I know, but that we should keep covenant one with another. Covenants freely made, freely entered into, must be kept. Take away that, I do not know what ground there is of anything you can call any man's right. What right hath any man to anything if you lay not down that principle, that we are to keep covenant? If you resort to the law of nature, by the law of nature you have no more right to this land or anything else than I have. When I hear men speak of laying aside all engagements to consider only that wild and vast notion of what in every man's conception is just or unjust, I am afraid and do tremble at the boundless, endless consequences of it.
Commissary Arson, you take away the substance of the question. Our sense is that an unjust engagement is rather to be broken than kept. Consider, is it just or unjust to bring back the king in such a way as he may destroy the people again? This agreement may be applied as a solution.
You come to it more particularly than that paper does.
Mr. Wildman says if we stay here for 3 days to satisfy one another, the king will come and say he'll be hanged first.
We are now upon that business which we spake of consulting with God about, and therefore I judge it altogether unseasonable. The business of our engagements lies upon us. The agitators claim that they are free in a double respect, that they made none, and if they did, then the way out is now, and it is a way which all the members of the army may take, and at one jump out of all engagements. It is a very great jump, I assure you.
I do not consider myself as jumping. But yet I hope that when I leap, I shall take so much of God with me, and so much just and right with me, as I shall jump, sure. Did we not engage for the Parliament and for the liberties of the people of England? Did we not engage against the King? We have got the better of them in the field, but shall they still remain masters of our houses? Never were engagements broken more than we break them. Are we now to be engaged to bring the King back? For my part, it may be thought that I am against the king. I am against him or any power that would destroy God's people, and I will never be destroyed till I cannot help myself. If a general mount his cannon against his army, is he not to be resisted? The king cannot come back unless this army now engages for him.
Whatsoever hopes or obligations I should be bound to, if God should reveal himself, I would break it speedily if it were after.
If what is engaged to tends to destruction, such an engagement does not bind.
I have gathered from 2 people's mouths that destruction is something near. And the cause of that destruction is the going of proposals to the king.
The question is whether the proposals will save us or whether they will not destroy us.
I think it is very necessary that those proposals be brought hither that we may see what they are.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sexbeck, you think your agreement is so clear, so infallibly just and right, that whosoever does not agree with it is about a thing unlawful.
We will have peace in this kingdom if we can. You cannot judge that we will deny the light of God till you know what we will do. No man can so judge of any man.
I hope that these gentlemen of the 5 regiments, their ends are good.
They are.
And I hope their hearts do tend towards peace, and I move this, that they would willingly come tomorrow and join with us in our councils together.
I like that exceeding well. In general, the agitators aim at peace and safety, but there may be some prejudices upon some of your spirits that we are wedded and glued to forms of government, so that whatsoever we may pretend, it is in vain for you to speak to us. You will find that we are so far from being so engaged to anything that we should not concur with you that the foundation and supremacy is in the people, and to be set down by them.
But will these agitators have power to debate? Otherwise it'll be useless, endless, your meeting tomorrow.
Mr. Wildman, Mr. Wildman, if you have any friends that are of a loving spirit that would contribute to a right understanding, I desire they come with you tomorrow. And God judge between you and us when we meet, whether we come to uphold our own resolutions or to lay ourselves down to be ruled by God.
Friday, October the 29th, 1647. The second day of the meeting of the General Council of the Army. Lieutenant Colonel William Gough leads devotions before the business of the day.
What is the reason that we find the light and glory of God eclipsed from our eyes this day? We have submitted the Spirit of God under the candle of reason, whereas reason should be subservient to the Spirit of God. And before God's light can take place again, that darkness of reason must be removed. First our lust, which doth seduce and entice us to wander from the Spirit of God, must be eaten out of us by the Spirit of God. And when there is no place for lust, there is place enough for the Spirit of God. That which I must express to you now concerns the conjunction that is between Antichrist, men that call themselves the church, and men in places of power, kings and great men. Now Jesus Christ, his work in the last days is to destroy Antichrist, and in that work Jesus shall have a company of saints to follow him. Now, it is a scruple among the saints how far they should use the sword. Yet God hath made use of them in that work. Many of them have been employed these 5 or 6 years. But let us tremble at the thought of standing in a direct opposition to Jesus Christ in the work he is about. Let us inquire into some of the actions we have done of late. In our proposals, have we endeavored to set up that power which God would not set up again? I mean in our compliance with that party which God hath engaged us to destroy. And so for the work of the day.
The agitators desire yet once more a compliance with those things we have propounded in our agreement. But if it please God to open our eyes, we shall comply with you. I am but a poor man, yet this message God hath sent me to you. There is great expectation of sudden destruction. I am loath to fill it up with words.
I know that danger is imagined near at hand, and indeed I think it is. But be the danger what it will, our agreeing is much more pressing than the pressing of any danger. So we do not delay too long.
Debate should be now and as public as possible.
I agree.
Let us go about the work. No question but we shall go together. I believe we shall jump all in one with it. But if we do not fall upon some extraordinary ways between, let us now seek to reform such laws as will not stand with the wholesome peace of the kingdom.
I second Everard's motion. Whilst we debate, we do nothing. I am confident that whilst you are doing, you will all agree together, for it is idleness that has begot this rust and this gangrene amongst us.
True, let us be doing, but let us be united in our doing. If we do not clearly understand one another before we come to act, I doubt whether we shall act unanimously. Some were satisfied that there lie no former engagements upon us, or none but such as it was duty to break, sin to keep. That was yesterday. Today I may speak it as in the presence of God, that I know nothing of any engagements that should hinder me from doing my duty. You know what the engagements are, and when we look upon them, with Colonel Rainborough, I have but one word to prevent you: imminent danger. It may be so imminent we cannot admit an hour's debate.
If we spend 10 days going over our past engagements, we will not come to the business. Neither will it prevent the evil I think will overtake us. Let us go the quickest way to work. Sir, the wounds of the kingdom and our need of cure is become so great that we would be willing, all of us, to heal the sore and not skin it over, leaving it unwholesome and corrupt at the bottom. This agreement is ready to our hands. I desire that you would debate whether it be a way to deliver us, and if it be, that you would accept.
We live now for 3/4 against our wills. Upon a second reading of this agreement, I set my hand to it, that we may not lie as drones to devour the people.
Some engagements have been made that have not been made by this Council of the Army. That is the cause of this cloud that hangs over our heads.
I am not under any engagement other than what all men in the army consented to, those that are published. I look upon this army as having carried with it hitherto the name of God and the interest of the people of God. If God saw it good to destroy not only kings and lords, but all distinctions of degrees, nay, further, to destroy all property, if I see the hand of God in it, I shall with quietness acquiesce, not resist it. But I would not have this army incur the scandal of breaking engagements and juggling and deceiving and deluding the world, making the people believe things in time of extremity that were never meant. So, to the method of our proceeding. Having expressed what I desire may be all our cares, not to read what our engagements
Fall upon
are,
that which is the engagement of all the rights and freedoms of the people.
Not to read our engagements, but to read the agreement presented here.
Let the agitators proceed.
Since our former oppressions and not yet ended troubles have been occasioned by the unequalled constitution of Parliament, we are fully resolved that hereafter Parliament be no longer unequally constituted. In order whereunto we declare first a redistribution of parliamentary seats according to the number of inhabitants.
All inhabitants who have not lost their birthright should have an equal voice in elections.
Before the conquest, each man had a vote. Since the conquest, the greatest part of the people is in vassalage.
I think the poorest he in England hath a life to live as the greatest he. Therefore, every man that is to live under a government ought first, by his own consent, put himself under that government. The poorest man in England is not at all bound to a government that he hath not had a vote to put himself under.
If you make this the rule, you fly for refuge to an absolute natural right, and you deny all civil right. Natural right is no right at all. No person hath a right to share in the disposing of the affairs of this kingdom that hath not a permanent fixed interest in this kingdom. You talk of birthright. But I do not think that by a man's only being born here he shall have a share in that power that shall dispose of the land here. Those that choose the representatives for the making of laws by which this kingdom is to be governed are the persons who comprehend the local interest of this kingdom. That is, the persons in whom all land lies, and those in corporations in whom all trading lies. If we shall go to take away this, we shall take away all property and interest that any man hath either in land or in estate or anything else. If you take away this fundamental part of the civil constitution, you allow none at all.
I do very much care whether there be a king or no king, lords or no lords, property or no property, and I think if we do not take care, we shall have none of these very shortly. I hear nothing at all that can convince me why any man that is born in England ought not to have his voice in election of representatives. Commissary General Ireton says that if a man has no permanent interest, he can have no vote. The main cause why Almighty God gave men reason was that they should make use of that reason, that they should improve. Either it must be the law of God or the law of man that prohibits the meanest man in the kingdom from having this vote as well as the greatest. I do not find anything in the law of God that a lord shall choose 20 burgesses, a gentleman but 2, and the poor man none. I find no such thing in the law of nature, nor in the law of nations. But I do find that all Englishmen must be subject to English laws, and I believe that there is no man but will say that the foundation of all law lies in the people. And if it lie in the people, I seek for why the poor man be exempted from the choice of those who are to make laws for him to live under, for aught I know, to lose his life under. Truly, I think there is not this day reigning in England a greater fruit or effect of tyranny than this.
I agree. I agree all should be equally distributed. But the question is whether it should be distributed to all persons or whether those that are the electors now should be the electors still and it be equally distributed amongst them. I would have an eye to property. Property is the most fundamental part of the constitution of this kingdom, which if you take away, you take away all. Which right will you invoke that all the people should have the right to elect?
Birthright. Right of nature.
By right of nature, whatever that may be, Mr. Shakespeare. By right of nature, one man hath an equal right with another in choosing him that shall govern. By the same right of nature, he hath the same equal right to any goods he sees, meat, drink, clothes, to take them for his sustenance. He hath the freedom to the land, freedom to anything in which he accounts himself to have property. If you hold up the law of nature paramount, I would fain have any man show me where you will end. Why, you should not take away all property.
Every man that is to live under a government ought
And
first by his own consent to put himself under that
and by
government.
saying every man hath a voice by right of nature, thus destroying all property, you, Colonel Rainborough, forget the law of God, that there's property. The law of God says it. Else why hath God made that law? Thou shalt not steal.
I said nothing concerning the law of
I
God.
wish you would not make the world believe this army is for anarchy.
Anarchy! It is you who is for
Anarchy.
I know nothing but this. The most yielding have the greatest wisdom. No man says that you have a mind to anarchy, but that the consequences tend to anarchy, must end in anarchy. We should not be so hot with one another.
Some men we debate with believe we are for anarchy.
I must clear myself as to that point. Truly, poor Colonel Rainborough takes so much offense. I do not know why. We speak to this agreement, not to persons. If you take the most fundamental civil constitution of this kingdom and set up paramount whatever a man may claim by the law of nature, I desire clearly to understand where then remains property. Now there is a forbidding of breaking the civil law by a divine law. Thou shalt not steal. You say no divine law tells us that such a corporation must have the election of burgesses, such a shire of knights, or the like. Divine law extends not to particular things, but in relation man to man. If a man were to demonstrate his right to property by divine law, it would be very remote.
To the thing itself, property. I desire to know how property comes to be in some men and not in others.
Colonel Rich, 5 to 1 in this kingdom have no permanent interest. If the master and servant shall be equal electors, then clearly those that have no interest in the kingdom will make it their interest to choose others that have no interest.
Now only the rich are chosen.
There were many revolutions in the Roman Senate, but there was never a confusion till the state came to know your kind of distribution of election. That is how the people's voices were bought and sold, and that by the poor. Thence it came that he that was the richest man, and a man of some considerable power among the soldiers, and one they resolved on, made himself a perpetual dictator. If we strain too far to avoid monarchy in kings, let us take heed that we do not call for emperors to deliver us from more than one tyrant.
Oh, that is a fine gilded bill. How comes it that there is property in some freeborn Englishmen and not in others?
Yes, yes. Has not the youngest son as much right to the inheritance as the oldest?
How will you decide that by law of nature?
There is a tanner in Staines worth £3,000, another in Reading worth 3 horskins. The second has a vote, the first none.
An answer, sir.
Mr. Wildman.
Thank you. We have been under slavery. That's acknowledged by all. Our laws were made by our conquerors. We are now engaged for our freedom. That's the aim of parliaments, not to constitute what is already established. Every person in England hath as clear a right to elect his representative as the greatest person. The undeniable maxim of government is that all government is in the free consent of the people. If so, no person is under a just government unless he, by his own free consent, puts himself under that government.
Aye, aye, aye.
Now, this he cannot do unless he consent to it, and therefore not give his consent to such persons as shall make that law for him.
He may, he ought to be, subject to all law that did not give his consent, but with this reservation, that if this man is unsatisfied to be subject to that law, he may go into another kingdom. And the same applies to any man having no permanent interest.
Surely the chief end of government is to preserve persons as well as property. If the law takes hold of my person, it is more dear than my property. Colonel Rich said that 5 parts of the nation, the poor people that are now excluded, would come in. I said, the one rich part makes hewers of wood and drawers of water of the other 5, and so the greatest part of the nation be enslaved. We are still where we were. What shall become of those many men that have laid out themselves for the Parliament of England in this present war, that have ruined themselves by fighting, by hazarding all they had? They are Englishmen. They have now nothing to say for themselves.
I do not urge anything so far as you represent. All I urged was that I think it worthy consideration whether rich and poor should have an equality in their interests.
I desire that all manner of plainness may be used, that we may not go on with the lapwing and carry one another off the nest. Something else must cement us.
If we can agree where the liberty and freedom of the people lies, that will cement us.
I cannot consent so far. If the principle upon which you move this alteration do destroy all kind of property, or whatsoever a man hath by human constitution, I cannot consent to it, because it is a thing evil in itself and scandalous to the world, and I desire this army may be free from both. The law of God doth not give me property, nor the law of nature. Property is of human constitution. I have a property, and that I shall enjoy.
I see that though liberty were our end, there is a degeneration from it. We have ventured our lives to recover our birthrights and privileges as Englishmen, and by the arguments urged, there is none. There are many thousands of us soldiers that have ventured our lives. We have little property in the kingdom, yet we have had a birthright. But it seems now, except a man hath a fixed estate in this kingdom, he hath no right in this kingdom. Oh, I wonder we were so much deceived. There are many in my condition. It may be a little estate we have at present, but we have as much a birthright as those 2 who are lawgivers. I am resolved to give my birthright to none. Whatsoever may come in my way, I will give it to none. If this thing be denied the poor, which with so much pressing after they have sought, it will be the greatest scandal. There was one thing spoken to this effect, that if the poor were given their birthright, it would be the destruction of this kingdom. This was a distrust of Providence. The poor and meaner of this kingdom, I speak in relation to the condition of soldiers in which we are, the poor have been the means of the preservation of this kingdom, and their lives have not been held dear for purchasing the good of the kingdom. Now they demand the birthright for which they fought. Those that act to this end are as free from anarchy or confusion as those that oppose it, and have the law of God and the law of conscience with us. We must be plain. We will not lose that we have contended for.
I confess I was most dissatisfied with that I heard Mr. Saxby speak, of any man here, because it did savour so much of will. Let us apply ourselves to such things as are cohesive. Everybody here would be willing that the Parliament might be made more representative than it is. But our debates are endless if we think to bring it to an issue this way. If we may but resolve upon a committee, things may be done. If I cannot be satisfied to go so far as these gentlemen that bring this agreement, I shall willingly withdraw myself in such a manner that the army shall see that I shall, by my withdrawing, satisfy the interest of the army, the public interest of the kingdom, and those ends that these men aim at.
If these men must be advanced and other men set underfoot, I am not satisfied. If their rules must be observed and other men that are not in authority be silenced, I do not know how this can stand together with the idea of free debate. I wonder how willfulness in one man is reason in another. I think it is no fault in any man to refuse to sell his birthright.
Do you not think it's sad and miserable that we have fought all this time for nothing? All here, both great and small, do think we fought for something. I confess, many of us fought for those ends which we since see were not those which caused us to venture all in the ship with you. It had been good in you to have advised us of it. You would have had fewer under your command to have commanded. But truly, sir, as for you putting off this question to a committee and coming to some other, I dare say you cannot settle upon any other until this be done. This was the ground we took up arms on, and it is the ground which we shall maintain. Concerning my making rents and divisions in this way, I am sent by a regiment, and if I should not speak, guilt shall lie upon me. Unless I see this agreement put to a vote, I despair of an issue.
Aye. You brought us to a fair pass, and the kingdom into a fair pass. For if your reasons are not satisfied and we don't fetch all our waters from your wells, you threaten to withdraw yourself. I see both parties at a stand. If we dispute here, both are lost.
It was in order to be brought to a fair composure that we met. When you have said what you can for your agreement, and have heard our objections, if then you put it to the vote without any qualifications, I doubt it'll pass freely. I have not heard Commissary General Ayrton answered. Not in one part, not a tittle. There is an extremity of difference between you. I propose a committee to bring matters nearer a general satisfaction.
The great stick here is this. I presume that all people and all nations whatsoever have a liberty and power to alter their constitution if they find them to be weak and infirm. Now, if the people of England shall find this weakness in their constitution, may they not change if they please?
The foundation of liberty is this. That those who shall choose the lawmakers shall be men freed from dependence on others. I have a thing put into my heart, which I cannot but speak. I profess, I am afraid, that if we go about to hazard the peace of the kingdom by altering the constitution, we shall find the hand of God will follow, and we shall see that that liberty, which we so much talk of and have so much contended for, shall be nothing at all by this our contending for it, by our putting it into the hands of men who will give it away.
If we should go about to alter these things, I do not think that we are bound to fight for every particular proposition. Servants, while servants are not included. You agree that he that receives arms is to be excluded?
Yes, because they depend upon the will of other men and should be afraid to displease them.
So,
for servants and apprentices, they are included in their masters.
We stand upon principles of unity and freedom. This agreement declares in what we concede these principles do lie. Now, in the progress of these debates, time spends. No question but our adversaries are harder at work than we are. There are meetings daily and contrivances against us. Now, we hope you will not say all the desire for unity is yours, but will acknowledge that we have nakedly and freely unbosomed ourselves unto you. Though these things in this agreement have startled many at the first view, yet we find there is still good hopes. We have fixed our resolutions, and we are determined, and we want nothing but that God will direct us to what is just and right.
I move that the entire army be called to a rendezvous and things settled as promised in its printed engagements.
We are called back to engagements. I think the engagements we have made and published have been better kept, if you will have it in plain terms, better kept than by those that have brought this agreement. I say the authors of the agreement, I say they have gone about to divide the army.
No, sir! No, sir! It was the soldiers did put the agitators on these meetings. It was the dissatisfactions that were in the army which provoked those meetings which you suppose tend so much to dividing. And the reasons of such dissatisfactions are because those whom they had to trust to act for them were not true to them.
And this be all the effect of your meetings to agree upon this paper.
There is but one thing in this that hath not been already insisted upon and propounded by the army heretofore, until we can acquit ourselves justly from any engagement, old or new, that we stand in, to preserve the person of the king, the person of lords and their rights, so far as they are consistent with the safety of the kingdom. Till that be done, I think there is a reason to hold to a positive constitution. Admit that this agreement of the people be the advantage it may be. Shall we then agree to it without any limitation?
The power of king and lords was ever a branch of tyranny.
Right.
And if ever a people shall free themselves from tyranny, certainly it is after 7 years fighting for their liberty.
Commissary General Ireton, though it is urged that the agitators ought to condescend to what this General Council do resolve, well, I conceive it true only so long as it is for their safety. Though it be declared that they ought to stand only as soldiers and not as Englishmen, yet the malice of their enemies would have bereaved them of their liberties as Englishmen. Therefore, as Englishmen, they have the same right to declare their apprehensions as I or any common. In your proposals to the king, the foundation of slavery is riveted more strongly than before. The right of the militia is acknowledged to be in the king, before redress of one of the people's grievances. And the king is so to be brought in, the people and army that have fought against him will be at his mercy. And finding this, the agitators perceived they were in a sad condition. The king coming in with a negative voice, the parliament but as so many ciphers, so many round O's. I say, this agreement doth lay down the foundation of freedom, whereby a rule between the Parliament and the people might be set. Otherwise, Parliament, by the King's negative voice in this very Parliament, may destroy us.
There is not one thing in our proposals that doth give the king any negative voice. We do but take the king as a man with whom we have been at a difference. We propound terms of peace. To say we should prefer the king's rights before the general good was as unworthy and as unchristian an injury as ever was done. We have declared in this council of the army that if the royal assent cannot be had, we account the authority of Parliament valid without it. We cannot hold the army to be the conclusive authority of the kingdom. Let me tell you, whoever talks of arrears gained or indemnity won by the sword is for the perpetuating of combustions.
Commissary General Ireton, you say it is a scandal for us to assert that you would have the king come in with his personal rights before the grievances of the people are redressed. But it says in your proposals that the king consenting to these provisions, the king is restored to his personal rights. There's his restoration.
No, sir.
Not a bare consideration of what his rights are, but a personal restoration before the people's grievances are even considered. Is Parliament next to lose their rights?
Oh, sir, come on, sir.
Monday, November the 1st, 1647. The third day of the meeting of the General Council of the Army. Lieutenant General Cromwell rises to speak.
First I move that everyone that desires to speak that God hath given them in answer to their prayers touching that new work before us, be free to address this council.
The work that is before us is to take away the negative voice of the king and lords. The sword is the only thing that from time to time has recovered the people's rights. That ever I read in the word of God.
The king is king by contract.
I say, as Christ said, let him that is without sin cast the first stone. If we had carried our power that we could say that we were without transgression, I should then say it were just to cut off transgressors. But as we are in our own actions failing in many particulars, I think there is much necessity for pardoning of transgressors. For the actions that are now done, and those that must do them, I think it is proper to conform to Parliament. And if you change this constitution, even to the very best of constitutions, it is but a mortal thing. It is but, as Paul says, dross and dung in comparison of Christ, and I ask why we so far contest for temporal things. That the elections for Parliament are very unequal is evident. But if there be a possibility of the Parliament offering those things to the king that may secure us, I think there is much to be said for their doing it. For the conduct of the army, I perceive there are several declarations from the army calling for rendezvous, disobedience to the general's orders. I have a commission from the general, and I understand that I am to do by it. I shall conform to him according to the rules and discipline of war, and according to those rules I ought to be conformable to no orders but his. It is not in the power of any particular man to call a rendezvous of a troop or regiment. That way is destructive to the army and to every particular man in the army. We have been informed by some of the king's party that if they give us enough rope, we will hang ourselves. We shall hang ourselves if we do not conform to the rules of war. Therefore I move that what we center upon must be the rules of war and our authority from Parliament.
My desire is to see things put to an issue, first concerning the king. You say you will set up the king as far as may be consistent with and not prejudicial to the liberties of the kingdom. And really I'm of that mind too. It is not our judgment only, but of all, save those that set forth this agreement.
You are in a wilderness condition. Some actings amongst us singly and jointly are the cause of it. We find in the word of God, I would heal Babylon, but she would not be healed. I think that we have gone about to heal Babylon, when she would not. We have gone about to wash a blackamoor, to wash him white, which he will not. We are going about to set up the power of kings which God will destroy, and which will be a burden stone that whosoever shall fall beneath it, it shall destroy him.
We should take heed what we speak in the name of the Lord, mentioning our own thoughts and conceptions with that which is of God. As for what Mr. Sexby spoke last, I cannot conceive that he altogether meant it. He alludes to a place of Scripture, Jeremiah 51. We would have healed Babylon, but she would not. The gentleman applied it to us. Truly, though that be not the intent of that Scripture, yet I think it is true that whosoever would have gone about to heal Babylon when God hath determined to destroy her, he does fight God, because God will not have her healed. And yet in general, to desire healing is not evil, though indeed when we are convinced it is Babylon we are going about to heal, I think it's fit we should then give over our healing. In most that hath been spoke there hath been something of God laid forth to us, and yet there have been several contradictions. Now God is not the author of contradictions. The contradictions are not so much in the end as in the way. The end is to deliver this nation from oppression and slavery, to accomplish the work God hath carried us on in. We agree thus far. Further too, that we all apprehend danger from the person of the king and from the lords. And if it were free before us whether we should set up one or the other, I do to the best observation find a unanimity amongst us all that we would set up neither. Thus far, we are agreed, and I think it is of God. But there are circumstances in which we differ. On the one part, there is apprehension that we cannot, with justice and righteousness, destroy all the interest king and lords have in the public affairs of this kingdom. On the other hand, that there is no safety to the liberty of the kingdom if you retain king or lords. Truly, I think it hath pleased God to lead me to a true and clear stating of our agreement and our difference. If this be so, we are better prepared to go on. If this be not so, I desire anyone will declare it. I shall go on, only in a word or two, to conclude what we have been about. For my part, I do not know any outward evidence of what proceeds from the Spirit of God more clear than this: the appearance of meekness and gentleness and mercy and patience and forbearance and love and a desire to do good to all and to destroy none that can be saved. And for my part, I say, where I do see men speaking according to this law, I am satisfied. I wish that none of those who think that there can be no safety with the king or the lords having their interest in the kingdom, that they will take heed of that which some men are apt to be carried away by, namely apprehensions that God will destroy these persons or that power, for that they may mistake it. And therefore those that are of that mind, let them wait upon God for such a way when the thing may be done without sin and without scandal too. Surely what God would have us do, he does not desire we should step out of our way for it. On the other hand, to those that do apprehend obligations in regard of our engagements, I say, if they find in their consciences that those engagements lead to anything which really cannot consist with the liberty, safety, and public interest of this nation, that they will not oppose any other that would do better than they would. If we do act accordingly, God will lead us to what shall be his way.
The reason that we cannot, as formerly, preserve the kingdom from its dying condition is a compliance to preserve the king, that man of blood.
Is it right to punish with death those that according to the king's command make war, and then say there is a way left for mercy for him who is the great contriver of all? Of the differences between us, I think they are not so easily to be reckoned up. That which Lieutenant General Cromwell instanced was that some did desire to preserve the person of the king and lords as far as it was consistent with the safety of the kingdom, and other persons do conceive that the preservation of the king or lords is inconsistent with the people's safety. Law must be paramount to all considerations.
Sir, Lieutenant General Cromwell did not speak of destroying of the king and lords.
No, sir.
I have not heard any man charge all the lords as to deserve punishment.
Then I conceive Lieutenant General Cromwell was saying the difference was that some persons were of the opinion that they stood engaged to the preservation of the power of the king and lords, while others held that the safety of the people was paramount to all considerations.
I think the Lieutenant General said that while some men did apprehend there might be an interest given to the king and lords with safety to the kingdom, others do think that no part of their interest could be given without destruction of the kingdom.
Yes. The person of the king and lords are not so joined together by any. The difference between us is whether we should alter the old foundations of our government so as to give to king and lords that which they could never claim before. Now, according to the king's oath, he is to grant such laws as the people shall choose. Therefore, they are laws before they come to him. As for the lords, seeing the foundation of all justice is the election of the people, it is unjust that the Lord should have that power. Therefore, The difference between us is whether this power be given to the king and the lords or no.
The question is not whether this should be given to the king and lords or no. The question is whether that interest they have in the Constitution should now be clearly taken away.
Then I say the whole tenor of your proposals must be altered if they allow the king a negative voice. Otherwise, we have no security for the people's liberty.
Parliament have asserted that it is their right that the king ought not to deny any laws they offer him. It is his oath. They have gone much farther. That if the king did not confirm them, they were laws in any case without him. Upon this, there hath been a war made. Parliament have gone so far as to make all laws and ordinances that were needful for the management of the kingdom without the king. If the king doth confirm what the Parliament hath done, and condemn all that hath been done against the Parliament, he acknowledges to all posterity that in case of the safety of the kingdom, Parliament are to make a law without him. Parliament are, in point of safety, a law without the king.
It appeared from what you said last night that the king ought to have his negative voice taken away.
Scots made provision that he should have no negative voice among them. Why should we not do the same?
These things the committee proposed last night will almost end us this dispute. I shall read them. We insist upon these fundamental laws for establishing the kingdom. That a certain period may, by Act of Parliament, be set for the ending of this Parliament within a year, and in the same Act provision to be made for the succession of Parliaments in the future, as followeth. First, that Parliaments biennially be called
I take the strongest exception at this proposal, that no man should be chosen as representative that hath not £20 a year.
Though I protest I would not widen the difference, yet the difference is as wide as ever. In our agreement, what is provided for the interest of the people, here you lay aside. And the interest of the king and lords, which gods by a judgment have taken away, is restored.
Mr. Parliament think fit to let me go on without taking advantage to object to every
This doth
particular...
establish the king's and the lord's interest surer than ever before.
I hope you will not offer such an assertion, but you have arguments to make it good.
I would proceed to the thing in hand.
If the king and lords were taking courses destructive, how should they be prevented?
If it comes to a breach of the peace, it will break some law. As to whether they are guilty or not guilty, they must be tried by their equals. The people of England are bound by whatever laws the House of Commons shall pass, but the king and the lords, as to their persons, are not bound. But if any of them be an officer of state, and the king is, then he is subject to the judgment of the House of Commons.
The godly people in this kingdom will never be satisfied unless all government be in the Commons, that freely. Truly, by what you propound here, the power of the House of Commons is much lessened, until it is clearly declared that the king hath no power to deny a law, and that the Commons need not address themselves to the king. The kingdom cannot be in safety, and the king can do what he will.
The business is much heightened. I can find no law in being in this kingdom which hath not lords to it, and king to it, and expressly, be it ordained by the king, lords, and commons, and always it hath gone so.
By the maxims of just government, government by king and lords is seen to be unjust.
Men cannot wrong themselves willingly, and if they agree to make a king their ruler, there's no injustice. They may either make him hereditary or elected. They may give him an absolute or a limited power. Here, the people have agreed with this. There has been such an agreement when the people have fought for their liberty and have established the king again.
'Twas their superstition to have such an opinion of a great man.
Any man that makes a bargain, finding afterwards 'tis for the worse, Yet he is bound to stand to it.
They were cousins, as we are like to be.
There's one maxim that all governments must be for the safety of the people.
Keep to that business of safety. It is upon the matter of safety that the real power of making laws is to be solely vested in the people.
The king and lords no more than not to do me a courtesy.
No courtesy!
Let us not fight with shadows.
We do not know what opportunity God will give us.
I do one have no permanent interest in
If God will destroy King, if God will destroy King or Lords, he can do it without our or your wrongdoings. If you not only take away all power from them, which your agreement clearly does, and take away all kind of distinction of them from other men, you do them wrong. Their having such a distinction from other men cannot do us wrong. The king and lords are suable, impleadable in any court. The king may be sued and tried by a jury. What needs more, where there are such laws already that the king and lords are so bound?
Whether it be a shadow or no, I think it is a substance when nothing shall be made but by address of the king. According to the letter of the law, if the king will, he may kill me by law. Ask any lawyer. By the letter of the present law, he may kill me and 40 more, and no law call him to account. This will be very shameful in future chronicles, that after so much blood, there shall be no better issue for the people.
In such confusion ended the third day of the meeting of the General Council of the Army in Putney Church on November the 1st, 1647. On November the 4th, the Council voted to extend the franchise to all except servants. On November the 5th, it was resolved that the army might be called to a rendezvous, and things settled. On November the 11th, the king most secretly escaped from his captivity at Hampton Court, and the rendezvous was never kept. Civil war began again.
The Putney Debates, a presentation for radio of the debates of the General Council of the Army in Putney Church between October the 28th and November the 1st, 1647, was devised and compiled by Jack Emery from shorthand notes made at the time and introduced by Christopher Hill. Timothy West was Oliver Cromwell, T.P. McKenna, Henry Ireton, and Brian Glover, Thomas Rainborough. Edward Sexby was played by Michael McStay, Robert Everard by John Barden, John Wildman by Gordon Reed, William Gough by John Church, Nathaniel Rich by Jack Emery, and Lewis Audley and Robert White by Martin Matthews. The narrator was Philip Sully. The Putney Debates were recorded in All Saints' Church, Fulham, and directed by Piers Plowright.